It's the dead of winter, minus 18 degrees outside, and a small box bolted to the side of a house is quietly pulling heat out of that freezing air and pumping it inside to help keep a family warm. For every unit of electricity it draws, it delivers 3 to 4 units of heat, more heat than the power you paid for. For a heater that runs on electricity alone, that sounds impossible. And yet, a British physicist saw it coming back in 1852. Lord Kelvin called it a heat multiplier and claimed you could warm a building using far less energy than simply burning fuel. He was right. This is the heat pump. And once you understand how it cheats the cold, you will never look at a freezing day the same way again. It all rests on one idea that sounds like a cheat. A heat pump does not make heat. It moves it. A furnace burns fuel to create warmth from scratch. A heat pump is more like a bucket brigade. It gathers heat that already exists outside and carries it indoors. That is why it can deliver more heat than the electricity it uses. The electricity mostly pays for the carrying, not for making the warmth from scratch. But there is a catch built into the universe. Heat only ever flows on its own from hot to cold, never the other way. To move it from the cold outside into your warm house, you have to push it uphill against its nature. That push is the only thing you pay for. Do it cleverly, and a trickle of electricity can move a flood of heat. That ratio has a name, the coefficient of performance, and for a good pump, it sits around 3 to 4. Put real numbers on it. A plain electric heater turns 1 kilowatt of electricity into 1 kilowatt of heat, and not a watt more. That is the ceiling for any heater that makes warmth straight from electricity. Hand that same kilowatt to a good heat pump, and 3, even 4 kilowatts of warmth can pour into the room. The electricity paid for one of them. The rest, the freezing air outside, handed over for free. And no, it is not a perpetual motion machine. Nothing is free. You spend a little electricity to relocate a lot of heat the sun already poured into the world. Move it. Don't make it. Which raises the obvious objection. If it is freezing outside, what heat is there to move? The air is cold. Here's what your skin gets wrong. Cold is not the same as empty of heat. Heat is simply molecules in motion. They only truly stop at absolute zero, minus 273 degrees Celsius. That is the real zero, the point with almost no heat left. Freezing winter air, at minus 18, is still 255 degrees above that floor. It holds about 85% of the heat energy it had at a comfortable room temperature. So the cold air outside is actually a vast reservoir of warmth. The heat pump only needs a way to reach in and skim some off. To reach into freezing air and pull heat out, the heat pump uses a special liquid called a refrigerant. Water boils at 100 degrees. This refrigerant boils at around minus 50, far, far below freezing. So when it flows through a coil out in the freezing air, that air feels scorching hot to it, easily hot enough to make it boil. And the boiling is the whole point. To turn from liquid into gas, the refrigerant must soak up a large gulp of energy, its latent heat. It drinks warmth straight out of the air to make the change. The air gives up a little heat and gets a touch colder. The refrigerant, now a gas, carries that stolen warmth away, and the pump can tune the trick with pressure so the liquid keeps boiling a little colder than whatever air it faces. That gas now carries heat, but it is only lukewarm, nowhere near hot enough to warm a room. So the heat pump concentrates it in a loop of 4 parts. Part 1. The evaporator. Outside, the cold refrigerant boils as it absorbs heat from the air, leaving as a cool gas. Part 2. The compressor. It squeezes that gas hard, and squeezing a gas makes it hot. In an instant, the lukewarm gas becomes hotter than your living room. How hot? Compressed to several times atmospheric pressure, that vapor can climb well past 60 degrees Celsius, hot enough in most systems to heat the water in your radiators or the air through your vents. Part 3. The condenser. Indoors, that hot gas flows past, pouring its heat into your room and condensing back into a warm liquid. Part 4. The expansion valve. The liquid is suddenly released, its pressure drops, and it turns icy cold again, ready to head back outside and do it all over. Evaporate? compress, condense, expand. The cold half lives in the box outside. The hot half lives in the unit indoors, and the refrigerant shuttles heat between them, second after second. None of this is new. As far back as 1748, a Scottish physician named William Cullen boiled a liquid under a vacuum and produced one of the first demonstrations of artificial cold, an early hint that cold itself could be conjured at will. A real theory of heat engines came a few decades later, in 1824, when a young French engineer, Sadi Carnot, set down the principles that govern heat and engines. Then, in 1852, Lord Kelvin took the leap. He saw that an engine run backwards would not produce work, it would pump heat, and could in principle warm a building for far less fuel than burning it. He called it the heat multiplier. A few years later, in the 1850s, an Austrian engineer named Peter von Rittinger built the first working heat pump and used it to boil down salt brine. But the machine in your home traces to a happy accident. In the late 1940s, an American inventor, Robert Weber, reportedly burned his hand on the hot outlet pipe of his deep freezer. He realized the freezer was throwing away perfectly good heat, so he piped that waste warmth into his house and built one of the first ground source heat pumps. The idea had finally come home. So if it is this clever, why doesn't every home already have one? Because the cold fights back. The colder the outside air, the bigger the gap the pump has to bridge, and the harder the compressor strains to lift that heat indoors. So the coefficient of performance falls as the temperature drops. On a mild day, a typical system might move 4 units of heat for every unit of power. Down near -15, many fall closer to 2. Still a win, just a smaller one. Then there is frost. The outdoor coil is colder than the air around it, so on a damp, freezing day, moisture freezes onto it like ice on a windshield, slowly choking off the heat. So most pumps do something sneaky. For a few minutes, the unit runs itself in reverse, sending hot refrigerant out to the coil to melt the ice, then flips back to heating. That is the defrost cycle, and it is why an outdoor unit sometimes steams in the cold. And there is one more catch, this one in your energy bill. In many places today, a unit of electricity costs more than a unit of gas, sometimes several times more. So even running at 300 or 400%, a heat pump is not automatically the cheaper option. Whether it saves you money turns on the local gap between power and gas prices, which makes this as much a question of energy policy as of engineering. That flip in reverse is a clue to something bigger. A heat pump is almost the very same machine as your air conditioner, the same basic parts in the same loop. An air conditioner pumps heat out of your house in summer. A heat pump pumps heat into it in winter. The biggest difference is simply which way the heat is flowing. And one part lets a single box do both jobs, the reversing valve. Flip it, and the indoor and outdoor coils swap roles. Warmth in winter, cool in summer, from one machine. You already own a close cousin as well. Your refrigerator is a heat pump that only runs one way, pumping heat out of the food and dumping it into the kitchen. Feel the warm grill on its back. That is the heat it pulled out of your dinner. There is one more way to beat the cold. Stop pulling heat from the freezing air and pull it from the ground instead. Dig down just a few meters and the soil barely notices the seasons. It stays close to 10 to 13 degrees all year, gently warmed by stored summer sun, not the planet's core. A ground source heat pump runs a long loop of pipe through that earth. To it, it is never truly winter, so under typical conditions, it keeps a high coefficient of performance, around 3.5 to 5, even when the weather above is a blizzard. An air source pump, reaching into -15 air, can sag toward 2 on the worst nights. The buried loop costs far more to install, but it largely sidesteps the worst cold weather slumps. All of this can still sound like a lab trick. So here's what happened when someone ran it at the scale of a small town. In the 1990s, the United States Army rebuilt the heating and cooling in over 4,000 homes at Fort Polk, Louisiana, swapping every one of them for ground source heat pumps in what was then one of the largest such retrofits ever measured. Across the whole base, Electricity use fell by about a third, roughly 26 million kilowatt hours every single year. It wiped out more than 250,000 therms of natural gas the housing had burned for heat and cut the community's peak power demand by nearly 40%. Now scale that up to a planet. Buildings swallow roughly a third of all the energy the world uses, and heating and hot water is one of the biggest slices of that. Which is why, on a grid that keeps getting cleaner, the humble heat pump keeps turning up at the center of so many serious plans to cut the energy and the carbon our buildings burn. Step back, and the payoff is staggering. The best a furnace can ever do is turn 1 unit of fuel into a little less than 1 unit of heat. Burning is forever capped at 100%. A heat pump moving 3 to 4 units of heat for every unit of electricity is effectively running at 300 to 400%, not by breaking physics, but by refusing to play the burning game at all. We call this efficiency, but it isn't, not really. You cannot beat 100% at turning one form of energy into another. You can only win this big by moving heat instead of making it. It never fights the cold. It borrows from it. A reservoir of heat hiding in the air we call freezing, reached with a liquid that boils in the frost and a pump that pushes warmth uphill. Lord Kelvin saw it in 1852. It just took us more than a century and a half to feel the cold and reach in anyway. If the hidden machine in your winter air was worth knowing, subscribe to Beneath the Wires for more of the engineering hiding in plain sight.